Manx Radio Podcasts, powered by Shore.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Hello and welcome to the latest look back at Talking Heads. Traffic calming measures, criticism of politicians, and civil partnerships for opposite-sex couples were some of the topics up for discussion this week. Here's Stu Peters.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Which traffic calming measures proved most effective in the island's villages? About 40 residents in the Strang Road area met on Saturday with the Director of Highways to raise concerns over traffic speed. Strang Road in Bradney is used as a route through to the hospital and into Douglas, particularly in the mornings. It's also used by buses. It's a balancing act for the Department of Infrastructure, which needs the road for through traffic while still retaining parking for residents. Work is due to take place in the area, and there are plans to increase the speed limit on the upper part of the road from 20 to 30. So what are the most effective ways of slowing traffic down in villages and the more rural areas of the island? Is setting a speed limit of 20 miles an hour enough, or are physical measures more effective? Do speed bumps work well, or are they largely ignored by many motorists, especially those in big 4x4s? Tell us your thoughts. Traffic calming measures such as the Douglas Prom should be adopted island-wide, or just leave it to fall apart for 50 years. I've always wondered what special influence the residents of Strang Road have. Lots of us live on busy roads, we just have to put up with it. What's so special about Strang Road, says John. I'm guessing that it does get a disproportionate amount of traffic. I don't know, I don't use that as a route, but I'm guessing from listening to the interviews that a lot of people coming in from Peel sort of take a left up Strang Road and go into Douglas via Tremode maybe. So I think it does, during rush minutes, get a disproportionate amount of traffic. And of course, when those houses were built, there wasn't a hospital. Well, there was Ballamona, but there wasn't a general hospital at the top of the road that people are accessing all the time. So I'm guessing that traffic's got much heavier in that area than maybe it once was. And the MHKs want thousands more to come to the island. One of the problems, too many cars, and worse it will get. Right, OK then, let's go to the lines. We've got our pal Rob on from Peel. Hello, Rob.
I lived on just off the Strand Road for 12 years. And
did you?
All kinds of problems on that road. And I worried about fire engines getting the fires and so forth. I think originally when they built the hospital, they should have put a bypass road in the road and made that a T-junction road up to, as far as Ballinarman where I lived. That would be a far better scheme.
Yeah.
I just worried during the busy periods when the fire engines could get to a fire on the Strand Road or Ballinarman with the heavy traffic, but we had loads of problems during that time.
Well, there are an awful lot of roads on the Isle of Man that you wonder if a fire engine would get down when it's busy. Most of them around Douglas at night time when everybody's parked up. It'd be virtually impossible, I would have thought, to get a fire engine down some of the side streets.
I think that was suggested years ago, putting a T-junction as far as Ballinarman and putting the bypass road in, but probably not enough pennies in the coffers at the end of it.
Probably not. What did you think about the traffic calming, about the sort of the speed bumps on the Strang Road there? Do you think?
It seemed to affect, especially some young drivers. I worried about the children walking up and down that road.
Yeah.
Nothing they seemed to do worked. So I think the bypass road would be in the problem to solve.
I don't expect that they've got any money for that now if they didn't have it then. But thank you for your thoughts on that, Rob. And at least Strang Roaders have huge front gardens between them and the road. Well, they do on the left going up the hill. Not so much on the right side, I don't think. Lots of us don't on faster, busier roads. Too posh to put up with traffic, maybe, says John. Certainly more use of PC flats, possibly sponsored by local shops, with the real traffic policeman with a radar gun every few weeks in the same location. Would certainly work in Kirkmichael. OK. More potholes and roadworks are needed, says Cliffy. Careful what you wish for, because I think you're going to get both. Stu, landmines, that'll slow them down, says Dave, and somebody else came up with the same idea. Landmines, that'll sort out the traffic problems, yes, sir. Traffic calming, bring back the horse trams and get people out of their cars. Well, you know, I mean, this is the trouble. People keep on saying, we need to get people out of cars. We don't. We need to get the island more car-friendly, if anything. Motorways, that's the future. You know, cars aren't going to go away, and all these people keep on saying, we need to get people out walking, and, you know, the cars were invented so you don't have to do that so much. All this talk about let's get people out of cars and onto buses. Why would you want to give up your own car, unless you absolutely can't afford it, and get on a bus and sit next to disagreeable people? So I don't know that that's that's the answer. Oh, in fact, Paul says, I know that this isn't the real answer, but any excuse to support the horse trams. As a byline, my last 2 visits to the Isle of Man have been with my bicycle, which is a little slower than some of the cars. Thanks for this show. Thank you, Paul, getting in touch off island. My parents live on Strang Road, so I have experience of the traffic on that road as a visitor. The issue is that many drivers refuse to adhere to the speed limit and have little patience to wait behind parked cars and give way in accordance with the highway code. That's just bad driving, isn't it? In my opinion, speed bumps are the best option to slow traffic down. It works very well where I live in Governor's Hill. There are 2 buses an hour along Halewood Avenue and they don't seem to have any problem with the speed bumps there, says Alison. Alexander Drive in Douglas is horrendous for fast traffic as people cut through from the Quarterbridge Road into Douglas. Needs some traffic calming measures there as it's a very densely populated residential area. The buses have been slowing everyone down for years, says somebody else. That's the answer, more buses. Stu St Mark's could do with a bypass, says Albert. OK. There's no right to park outside your house, says Dave. Also, car sharing keeps some cars off the road and saves money on fuel costs. Well, if you can do that, yeah, fine. We have a blind right-hand corner on our estate, Kerricor in Peel, with desperate parking facilities. I've asked Peel commissioners a number of years ago for some sort of traffic calming measure, but nothing's ever happened. It's an accident waiting to happen. Great show, says Derek. Thank you, Derek. That's very kind of you. I have a concern with regard to the extended pavements which seem to have appeared everywhere. They really should paint the edges white to highlight them in wet, dark conditions. They're a very real hazard, particularly to bikers who tend to be forced towards the road edges, says Ruth. It doesn't seem to matter where you are on the island. Drivers ignore speed limits. How many people go through Laxey Village at a maximum of 20 miles an hour, for instance? Perhaps a few speed enforcement cameras might help. Fenella called. Ambulances don't usually go up the Strang Road. Oh, right, OK. I didn't realise that, Fenella. Thank you. They tend to use the main road past Braddon Bridge and up that way because it's a quicker ride and more convenient. They don't tend to use Strang Road unless they've been to somewhere along that road. Right, OK. I assumed, wrongly, made an ass out of you and me, that ambulances went up there. Clearly not. The problem with a lot of roads is the stuck-up female 4x4 drivers on school runs. Oh, here we go. Here's a rant. They give no respect to other users and think they should use the whole width of the road. In Saddlestone we have speed humps, but they don't bother the 4x4 drivers. They just gun it over them, says Pat. Well, I suppose there's got to be some reason to have one of those big things. Why all the fuss? Isn't this the road racing capital of the world, says John in Ramsey. Tongue very firmly in cheek. Station Road in St John's needs traffic calming people to actually stop at the stop sign at the end of Patrick Road and adhere to the 7.5 tonne weight limit. Maybe higher police presence or on-the-spot fines. Well, that'll do it. A bit of a concerted campaign. And if you see in the paper that, you know, people have been given hefty fines for ignoring speed limits and weight limits and things, then that might make others think twice. Strang Road, all the people get your cars parked on your driveways and give the rest of us a break. Fighting talk, that. Strang Road has speed bumps for a number of years before it was resurfaced, so I just wonder why they weren't automatically put back. Someone must know the reasons why they weren't. That's from Margaret in Peel. Yeah, well, there were sort of plastic ones, weren't there? But there were also sort of proper brick, you know, part of the road construction speed bumps there. I've not been up there for a while. Stu, Alexander Drive could do with a bypass too, says Albert. We're building lots of road, considering that we're skinned. Stu, what works best is a bobby with a speed gun. Yes, if anyone can persuade them to venture out of their police stations. Also, I've seen vehicles at 40 to 50 miles an hour travelling from B&Q towards the roundabout on the Castletown Road. I've also seen some close calls at the junction of Bear Cam and the same road because some motorists indicate a left turn for the roundabout before they've gone past the junction, and people on this junction pull out thinking the vehicle indicating left is going to turn left into Bear Cam. If that's the way it's pronounced, I'm not 100% sure. That's from Pete. Thank you, Pete. Yes, I know what you mean. Try driving around Williston. No room with all the big luxury motorhomes and speedboats parked all over the place. Aha. Axe to grind. The best traffic calming solution that I've seen was in Portugal. Speed sensing traffic lights are triggered if somebody exceeds the speed limit. Hence, if you try to speed, you constantly stop by a series of traffic lights. However, if you proceed at or below the speed limit, you can proceed normally. What a good idea. Another idea is to put up target-shaped design signs underneath speed limits which say this is a limit, not a target. These are used throughout New Zealand and apparently have helped bring about a change in attitude to the speed which some motorists travel at. Unfortunately, this idea will not prevent the persistent offenders, which is why I favour the first idea, says Malcolm. What a good idea. School Road in Onchan is a classic example. By Onchan School, a pinch point was put in. Now people park either side of it. Convenient. DOI can find tarmac for speed bumps but not for potholes. What's the difference? Asks Mark. Can't understand the fear of speed cameras. If you keep to the limit, what's the big problem? They would do the trick pronto, says Irene. All right, OK. I think that before traffic calming and the like are introduced, much more should be done to ensure that traffic flow is much smoother at junctions and where roads are obviously wide enough to introduce lanes. Lanes also need to be longer than they currently are in many places, as they soon fill up. One stationary driver is a frustrated driver, says Richard. Yeah?
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Should parents be able to remove their children from lessons covering same-sex marriage? Amendments have been put forward to propose new legislation by North Douglas MHK John Horton, but the Chief Minister's accused him of using delaying tactics to stall the progress of the bill. So, should it be an option for parents, or is it something that all children should be educated about? I do wonder if Mr Bell is standing for re-election again, says Alan. Seems like he's on a last crusade to get this bill pushed through before the end of his Tynwald term. Surely the public sector pensions, means testing for public sector, right, etc., are more important, says Alan. It's a pity Mr Bell doesn't put as much effort into speeding up the equal rights for the disabled as he does for other groups, with 10 years behind the UK as far as disabled equality, says somebody else. What school lessons teach about marriage? Never mind same-sex marriage. Every time Mr Horton opens his mouth, I hear an idiot speak. Well, that's a bit over-personal. Surely he's got a point of view, and whether you agree with it or not, surely he's entitled to air it, and then we can make our own minds up about it. But, OK, Mr Bell, parents should have a choice if they want their children in a class that promotes homosexuality. Now, that's an important word in this. I don't think that this is promoting homosexuality as such. I think it is saying that some people are homosexual. My children go to school to achieve a good education with the hope that it leads to a good job. I don't want my kids' time wasted on something that won't further their careers, says Col. OK, but, I mean, I'm a parent and I wouldn't have any problem at all, my children having been taught about that. Because let's face it, especially if you've got young children and one of them finds it strange that they go to play with a friend who's got two dads or two mums, then that leads to all sorts of awkward questions, surely. If in school they've been taught that a marriage or a relationship doesn't always mean a man and a woman, it doesn't have to get into the nitty-gritty of anything, does it? But as long as it gives a sort of a broad brush approach to it, then I wouldn't have thought that was a bad thing. But it's for you to say. Stu, questions such as these seem to boil down to the question, should a person's religious beliefs trump the law of the land, says David H. In my mind, no, never, David, but some people disagree. Bob called, why in heaven's name are children being taught about this at a young age anyway? They should be taught reading, writing and arithmetic, the 3 R's. Plenty of time for that when they're 13, 14 and 15, but sex education for the young ones, 5, 6 and 7, I don't understand. Maybe I'm of the wrong generation, but I think they should be educated to do well in life from an academic point of view. They'll pick up the rest along the way. You know, kids leaving school these days who can't read and write properly. It's a crazy world. Hey, boy, you'd think that in the current climate, Bell would have more pressing priorities than shoving the same-sex marriage bill down the public's throats. Just because he thinks it's of great importance for his own ends doesn't mean the rest should go along with this. Opinions from Frank. Thank you, Frank. There was no mention of marriage when I was at school. Why would a school try to teach anything on the subject? Kids, whether in a nuclear or single or any other kind of family, will be well aware of how marriage works or doesn't. There's nothing a teacher can say that they won't know already, says Mick. When I was at school, we had religious instruction. Roman Catholic children didn't attend as the rest of us were C of E, so why can't parents not be allowed to do similar if they want the children to make up their own minds when they're older, says Irene. OK, keep your thoughts coming in. Interesting. Parents are the responsible people for bringing up the children should be able to remove them from these lessons. Roman Catholics were able to be removed from morning assembly when I went to school. There was no problem with that. OK. I can't believe Mr Horton still wants to think about this. What is the amendment as proposed designed to achieve? Is it driven by a personal moral crusade? If so, he should keep that to himself and let others choose their own way, having had the information to do so. Or is it to try and prevent some young people finding out about same-sex relationships and choosing their own sexuality as a consequence? Does anybody seriously think that having knowledge of homosexuality, for example, would make you choose that as your sexual preference? I think we all know about same-sex relationships and our sexual preferences remain unaffected by it. If you really think that being told about same-sex relationships will alter your preference, all I can think is that you can't be very secure in your own sexuality. No, this is another John Horton issue generated by a lack of understanding and simple oafishness. Let's move on and leave him behind, says Trevor. Strong word. Stu, marriage is marriage, whether it's between a man and a woman, two men or two women. Therefore, I think it's totally wrong to teach our children about gay marriage only. No, they're not doing that, says Bert in Portsmouth. They're not just teaching about gay marriage. I'm sure they'll talk about marriage generally. I don't always agree with Alan Bell's views. However, I do agree with his objections to the amendments to the same-sex marriage bill. We should never lose sight of this, that this is about equality for all Isle of Man residents. As for the concerns over educating our children, what a ridiculous statement. I'm not religious. In fact, I consider myself an atheist. I respect all those who have a faith, though, and feel no obligation at school to opt out of religious education. Surely we have an obligation to provide all the facts to our children about the different way that people fall in love and how people live. It's not indoctrinating anything. Get a grip, says Jan. That's us told. Default position is now gay or you're labelled. Well, I'm not gay and I don't feel labelled. Has anyone thought about the damage that could be done to a child's mind if he or she is brought up in a home where gay sex is practised? Well, they practice for so long and then they get good at it. They could end up with an opinion that gay sex is normal, which it's not, says our contributor. Well, it is if you're gay. It's not normal for me, and it's clearly not normal for you, but it's normal if you're gay. I mean, that's the thing. Live and let live, folks. This from Julie. I teach my students to think and question like this can usually start a good debate. It doesn't mean that we're pushing our opinions or beliefs on any of them. Quite the opposite. We need to look at all sides of life. Adults don't always get it right. I don't share the same beliefs as my own children, but we accept each other's thoughts. If you exclude thinking in lessons, we're on a slippery slope downwards. Yeah, you're right, Julie, I think. Definitely children should be taught about same-sex relationships. Teaching in itself is giving the children as much information and knowledge about the world that they're about to embark into as possible. Ignorance about this subject is not going to help them in a lot of situations they may find themselves in. That from Wendy G in Onken. Thank you, Wendy G. Perhaps homosexuality is just evolution, and who knows, one day the human race may be hermaphrodite, says Joan. I hope not. Parents can try to hide real life from their kids, but they'll come across gay people at some point. What will they tell their kids then? Will they ban the kids from having anything to do with gay people? What if a child is gay but hasn't had the confidence to come out? How will they feel if parents keep them out of lessons? And why should parents be allowed to impose their views on their kids? Well, it is their children, and it's a fine line. I think the pension issue is far more important than the same-sex marriage one, so come on, MHKs, sort out the pensions first. That from Sean.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Do you welcome plans to resurface part of the Mountain Road? It'll be closed from the Cregner Bar to the Ramsey Hairpin for a fortnight later to allow work to be carried out at the waterworks and along the Mountain Mile. The closure will be between April the 11th and the 23rd. The time will also be used to erect the one-way signage for the TT and carry out other maintenance work. Do you welcome the planned work on the Mountain Mile and down by the waterworks there? Is closing the road entirely the best option to speed up the process? Or would you prefer to see it kept open to vehicles even if access is restricted? Comment here from somebody. If the waterworks isn't sorted out, the road will be shut anyway when the bank falls down. I didn't realise that it was in danger of falling down there. OK, well, that's interesting. Maybe that's part of the work that they're doing then. While the road's closed, more pullover places should be made to allow safe overtaking for the faster drivers, says Tom. Derek called. The reason they close the road when they do work is to protect the workers. It's purely down to the lunatic drivers who've put the workers in danger in the past. Health and safety means that they have a duty of care to the workers, but apart from that, the amount of work that they have to do up there each winter to keep the road open for a few fast drivers is unreal. It's only for fast drivers, is it? OK. There are two other ways out of Ramsey, assumedly for the slow drivers. But when we get bad weather, there must be somebody going back and forth up there to close the road and reopen it, only to have to close it again a little later. And it's all for a very few fast drivers. What? Mark my words. It'll happen again tomorrow when we get the wintry showers. And what damage is done by the heavy vehicles going back and forth clearing it? That's got nothing to do with the TT. You can't blame the TT for that. Thank you, Derek. I would take issue with your thought that the mountain road is only there for fast drivers. Same old lame excuses for the poor standard of work carried out by the DOI. When is it all going to end? As to the workers being flexible about working on the mountain road, all that entails is masses of double time and days off in lieu, or extra hours worked. It's a scandal, says Roy. OK. Robin Peel. Stu, you're wondering why they're closing the whole road. Presumably it's to allow them to put all the one-way signage up that they use. That's likely to be the reason. Yeah, well, I think they said in the clip that I played earlier on, I think Phil Gaughan said that it was a lot of the TT preparation work was going to be carried out as well. But you wouldn't have thought it took a fortnight to do that. So quite why they're not, why they're closing the road from the bungalow down to the Crag, I'm not sure. It's surely not just for that, unless there's extra work to be done on those sections of road as well. Stu, what's your definition of a slow driver? Asked David H. If I gave you a definition, David, you'd beat me over the head with it for weeks and weeks, so I'm not even going to go there. How much work can be done to a road? It must be the most frequently closed road in the British Isles. Surely it shows up the workmanship, as there are many hilly roads that can't warrant such attention. It's only a hill after all, says Ian. I do like balance on this programme. We don't always manage to get it, but we always try. This from Josh, he says, how lucky the island is to have so many experts in so many different fields of work and business. I didn't know we had so many civil engineers living here. Why do we need to get consultants from the UK for anything? I think it's because they don't want the public seeing them sitting around drinking tea. This is from Dave. You only have to look at how long it's taking to lay some curbstones along by the new cemetery. A couple of months, if this was across, they would have been sacked and a faster contractor brought in. Well, yeah, I think you're saying what an awful... And that's the trouble, you see, when you see these building works and road works going on. What all of us see is one fella with a spade and 18 fellas watching him. Well, that's what it looks like now. Like I say, to be fair, I'm sure that there's a reason for that and that those other 17 fellas are just waiting for their chance to get in and do something. But that is the perception whenever you see work gangs. One fella working and half a dozen fellas watching. Dear Stu, still love the show and thank you for today's laugh. I don't know which one. As only the minister responsible, Phil Gorn, could say. He doesn't know what they're really doing up at the mountain, but he's letting them close it for 12 days anyway. Thank God the election's not so far away, says Bill. Thank you, Bill. Stu, are the DOI going to pay people for petrol, etc., for the extra mileage to travel when the mountain road is closed? I think we all know the answer to that one, don't we? Could these works be done at night when there's not so much traffic around? It's not just the mountain is closed, it also makes other routes much busier, says John. Yes, but I'm guessing that it's quite difficult to do roadworks and things at night. I'm guessing. I mean, I know you can put arc lights and things up, but I guess that daylight is much easier to work in. Nobody lives up the mountain, so it's easier to close it instead of rescuing people. Simple, says David. Right, now that'll be it then. I don't agree with the mountain road being closed because of all the delays it'll cause. What's up with closing at 9am till 4:30pm to let traffic get into Douglas and work all weekend if needed to cut out all the hold-ups it'll cause? That from Sean. Let's go to the lines, and we've got Brian on. Hello, Brian.
I've worked on the mountain. I used to drive wagons for contractors.
Yeah.
I've worked up there. Do you remember the old advert where a Volkswagen ran along and threw a load of cones up in the air?
I don't know.
Right. It was I can't remember who it's for, insurance company, isn't it? Right. Well, I've actually seen that happen with the big cones.
Oh, right. What, a car's hit a line of cones?
It was a coach, actually, a firm that's no longer in existence, not the current one.
Yeah.
But he ran along the line of cones and flicked them all up in the air.
Wow.
Which caused a bit of consternation amongst the lads, as you can imagine.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Speeds are ridiculous. And also, one of the jobs I was on the mountain mile, and they took out the big slate drains and put in modern drainage.
I believe so,
Thereafter we've had landslips, but that's another question.
Yeah.
But at times there were wagons and vehicles, plant on one side of the road and 3 foot wide slots across the road on the other. How would people drive over those?
I see, right, yeah. So you think it's sensible then to close the whole thing and just crack on? Yeah.
It's safe, it's sensible, it gets the job done far more quickly.
Good.
And there's too many idiots on that road anyway.
All right, Brian, thank you very much. Don't forget the guys on the shovels pay their taxes to pay for this rubbish. Okay. Stu, when the mountain road is shut, you can bet there'll be roadworks at Laxey, says Bill. Now, that's a good point, because that does seem to happen an awful lot. It's all very well closing the mountain, but then you find out that the alternative routes also end up with diversions and things on them, and that really needs thinking through, doesn't it? So that doesn't happen this time. I think people won't mind so much being diverted as long as the diversion routes aren't blocked as well. Not only does the minister not know what they're doing on the mountain road, but he's rubber stamping the finance for it. You couldn't make it up. Still fed up motorist. Well, yeah, I mean, let's be fair about it. He's the political leader of the department, so I don't suppose he does know the nuts and bolts of every single scheme that they've got. I don't. Do you expect him to? I don't. Maybe the 17 fellas are part of the same group I saw in Annika last week. One man up a ladder, another at the bottom with a bracket ready to hand it over. Wheel tappers and shunters. A third man standing alongside with a clipboard. 3 men to fix a gutter. You can't make it up, can you? That's from Howard. Thank you, Howard. When the mountain roads close, will Laxey Village have roadside parking suspended to avoid major hold-ups? Asked Mark. Not an unreasonable question. I don't know the answer to it. Dear Stu, you're a genius. What a great idea. Which? When? Where? Who? Me? Maybe Phil Gorn should go up the mountain in April and see what they're doing and let the rest of us know when he eventually finds out. However, I guarantee whatever they're doing, it'll shave 2 seconds a lap off to the senior record. We've seen it all before. And that from Bill. Thank you, Bill. The amount of time they close the mountain for is ridiculous. I have to say, I'd quite like to live in Ramsey, and, nowhere on the island is that far from Douglas that you couldn't do the commute. But on the basis that, the mountain, and it seems for the daftest of reasons, a little bit of wind, a little bit of rain, and they close the road. I mean, all right, if you've got 10-foot deep snow drifts, then you would close the road. But it seems that any excuse and they close it. Now, if it's because they're protecting us from ourselves, then that's all very well, I suppose, in that, if they've got to rescue people who get blown off the road when the winds get up a little bit, but maybe those people ought to have the licences taken away. It's the equivalent of closing the road from Ballasalla to the Quarter Bridge for that length of time, says Bob. It's the main road out of Ramsey. I wonder how the people of the south would feel about a similar road being closed to them. Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I mean, it's one of the things that decided me against living in Ramsey. Apart from that, I'd quite like to live up there, but I couldn't face that all the time.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
You're listening to the latest Talking Heads podcast, featuring highlights from the programme over the past week.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
How far should criticism of politicians be allowed to go? A cartoon in an island newspaper has triggered a debate over whether lampooning politicians is fair journalism. Last month, Manx Radio exposed Doncaster MHK's Zach Hall as a plagiarist in a speech he made opposing same-sex marriage. Mr Hall used extensive passages from an article by Catholic theologians in an Irish religious newspaper, but failed to acknowledge the source. Now there's a picture of Mr Hall as a parrot on the front page of the Manx Independent, or there was. In the Keys yesterday, that was described as gutter journalism by fellow MHK Chris Robertshaw, who condemned it as an attempted assassination of Mr Hall's integrity. Mr Robertshaw made the comments during the debate over the clauses of the Marriage Same-Sex Couples Bill, but it seems there wasn't much support for the amendments put forward by Douglas North MHK John Horton, and it went through comfortably. Marion Kenny's been talking to the editor of Isle of Man newspapers, Richard Butt, who's dismissed the charge, saying the story simply drew attention to poor political judgment. Should politicians expect to face criticism? Is it part of the job? How far should that criticism be allowed to go? Does it go too far sometimes? Let's go to the lines and have a word with Brian. Hello, Brian.
Stu, a few points here. First of all, as you know, for a short time I was in local politics and stood for the Keys.
Yes.
And once you put your head above the parapet in that kind of a role, I think you expect it.
In any form of public life, it always amazes me when you get these new pop stars who start moaning about they've got no privacy after they've spent years and years and years trying to get famous, and the two things are just not interchangeable, I don't think.
Absolutely. As soon as you start running for public office, you're immediately there for the opening of a dustbin. Anything that gets you into the public eye, that's what you want. However, they do say there's no such thing as bad publicity. Well, I would disagree with that statement.
Yeah.
Now, I had an experience, and Mr. Butt published letters and made statements in the press. And what I think you've got to be careful of here is complacency of the press.
Right.
If somebody makes an allegation, right, and you're going to report it, and you're going to say, Stu Peters has called Brian Stoll a paedophile.
Yeah.
Right? Now you're only reporting what Stu Peters said.
Yes.
Right? So the individual is protected. Well, that's what happened to me. And what really galls me is there was no attempt to do any kind of an investigation. A very simple telephone call to the Clerk of Oncan Commissioners and a request to have a look at the minutes of a meeting would have clarified the situation.
Gotcha.
He didn't bother to do that. And I think there has to be a responsibility if you're going to report
Yes.
and you're going to lampoon and you're going to make statements. Don't hide behind the third party.
Okay. Well, and the other thought is that, I mean, there's always got to be a right to reply. I mean, I'm very big on that on this programme, in that, you know, people make all sorts of assertions about things, but I think you've always got to make sure that people can get the opposite point of view across.
Yeah, but that doesn't always work either. If you've got a situation, and there is the funny thing here that I found out, when you want to take legal action against somebody for a libelous comment.
Yes.
Now, you can do that quite easily, but a politician can't.
Right.
As long as he qualifies it by saying, in my opinion...
Ah, right, okay.
Stu Peters is an abject bank robber.
Yeah.
Right? Well, that's Stu Peters' opinion.
Right, and there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah.
You can't lambaste them for having an opinion.
All right. What about the parrot picture? You know, getting down to specifics. Do you think it went too far?
No, come on. The big upset that I had with the farmers, young farmers, is they lampooned me at one of their concerts.
Yes.
And I said to Bush Karouche afterwards, you had somebody playing the role of Brian Stoll and lampooning me rotten.
Yeah.
And the decent thing you could have done was to ask me to play the role myself. I'd be happy to have done that. You know, but people will take things in fun, and if you are dumb enough to go and copy somebody else's speech, to plagiarize, that's an indication that you haven't got really much of an opinion of your own or much of ability of your own.
Yeah.
I can't agree with anybody so wholly and fully that I would take the whole of their speech verbatim and repeat it. No. I can't even agree with myself to that degree.
Well, I'm working on a great speech at the moment, and it starts off about fighting them on the beaches.
Well, let me give him a bit of advice, right? The quicker he shuts the heck up about it, the quicker it'll be a chip wrapper.
Yeah, well, and in fairness, I mean, it's Chris Robertshaw that's taken umbrage about this, more, I think, probably than Zach Hall himself, I don't know.
Well, come on, Chris. Get a life, man. Get a life. You're in politics. The island is sinking round our ears. We've got major problems, and you're devoting time to a picture of a parrot.
This parrot is no more. Thanks for joining us today, Brian. Let's have a look at some of your comments about this. Yes, criticism is entirely fair, and I'm sure they accept that, but schoolboy making fun of instead of grown-up reporting just lowers the tone of our newspaper. That's not proper journalism, surely, says Liz. I don't have a problem with it, to be honest. I think it was fine, but that's, again, it's just a point of view. Good afternoon, Stu. This is from Norman. It says, satire is part and parcel of political life. Yes, I think that's my view on this. If indeed Zachary Hall has plagiarised certain paragraphs from an Irish newspaper as alleged, then he should expect all that goes with it. In short, if none of them can handle the heat, they should get out the kitchen. Poor Mr. Robertshaw, if the heat's too hot in the kitchen, get out. Politicians the world all over know that politics is a dirty game before they go into it, so they should be prepared for the worst it throws at them, as long as it's not defamatory, says Alan. A newspaper should report the facts, not be an outlet for the editor to give sarcastic self-opinion, says Tom. Newspapers all have opinion columns, but they're clearly labelled as such, and I don't think that this sort of went beyond the bounds of decency or anything else. You know, it was lampooning, and as Norman said earlier on, I mean, and Richard Butt himself said, this goes back to the 1600s. You know, there's a proud tradition of that kind of thing. And it could have probably been even more vindictive if they'd wanted it to. At least it was a good-looking parrot. Stu, if Zach cannot write his own words, then if he gets caught out, tough. Some MHKs get away with a lot of things. So if they get found out about something, so what? Sometimes we need to have a smile when we read the papers or hear the news, says Katie. Well, that's quoted for truth as well. I found Zach Hall's approach offensive, spouting somebody else's religious dogma in our parliament as his own idea, so serves him right. The press has always lampooned politicians, so get over it, says another Chris. This government wants to grow a set. They wouldn't last 5 minutes in Westminster and should be thankful that they've not got the editor of Punch around, says Jan. Yeah, or Private Eye. For goodness sake, Mr. Robert Shaw needs to get a grip. The paper's not owned by the government, or is it? He wants to thank his lucky star. Spitting image is no longer around. Oh, the minister's brain is missing. Oh dear, oh dear. Yeah, well, spitting images, I mean, that didn't pull many punches, did it? One from Andrew. He says, as an exiled Manxie, so not able to look in on the island from the outside as far as Isle of Man newspaper's cartoon goes, I have no problem with it. Oh, I am able to look in from the outside. If in fact compared it to some of the coverage in the UK press, it's mild. I did note Mr. Butt's comments that his aim was to sell papers. Fair enough, but he needs to be careful that he doesn't confuse opinions for fact. Some of the recent articles in the papers seem to confuse the two. I don't know if that's fair, necessarily. I mean, certainly there's an opinion page, but I don't know that they confuse the two. As for criticising politicians, again, fine, but I find at time that forums such as your own programme do take it into the realm of personal attacks, which is not helpful in sorting out the island's problems. Yeah. Remember, you can look up your MHK's details in the phone book. I can't even remember our MP's name. With that in mind, an island community such as the Isle of Man, people shouldn't confuse incompetence with corruption. Some of you contributors are guilty of this. Yes, that's true.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Should heterosexual couples have the right to enter a civil partnership rather than opt to get married? Ramsey MHK Leonard Singer is hopeful that opposite-sex couples could soon be able to enter into civil partnerships. His tabled amendment for the Marriage Same-Sex Couples Bill was included as it went through its clauses stages in the Keys on Tuesday. If the Isle of Man does go down the route of introducing civil partnerships for heterosexual couples, it will be joining a number of other jurisdictions around the world, although for the time being at least a change in the legislation seems to have been ruled out by the UK. But just what are the legal differences between getting married and entering a civil partnership? We're joined in the studio now by Advocate John Wright. Good afternoon, John, and thanks for coming in today.
Nice to see you again, Stuart.
Absolutely. Now, it's one of those things, we've been talking about this now for a number of weeks on the programme, on and off, but I get confused about what's the difference. What's the legal difference between being married or having a civil partnership?
There are very few, but the first thing is what you can call it. Obviously, marriage is marriage and civil partnership is civil partnership. The second is that civil partnership can only be civil, whereas marriage can be both civil and have a religious element. Then we have things like what you have to do to advertise the marriage or civil partnership and whether or not you have to speak any words and what those words should be. They're specified for marriages in church. For civil partnerships, all you have to do is sign a set of forms. You don't even have to say anything if you don't want to.
Oh, right.
It's as simple as that. And then there are things like whether or not the marriage or civil partnership could be annulled, and there are big differences there. So that, for instance, if someone was suffering from a venereal disease at the time of marriage, that's grounds for annulling the marriage, but not for a civil partnership. Not quite sure why that is. It's a sort of strange sort of difference. Then there are grounds like how you can get divorced, and you can get divorced in a marriage, whether it's a civil or a religious one, on the basis of adultery, but that's not available in civil partnerships. And there's a simple reason for that. It's practical. It's the definition in law of what adultery is in terms of being a physical act, which might not apply when it was two women or two men.
Right.
There might not be penetrative sex, but obviously sexual contact that is less than adultery can still be used in ordinary marriage for divorce on the grounds of unreasonable behaviour. So it's very, very similar.
Sounds like the Bill Clinton defence, that.
It may well be, yes.
Good stuff.
But apart from that, everything else is the same. Pension rights are virtually identical. In fact, they are identical.
Are they?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I've got, I know a couple who are a bit fed up about the fact that, you know, gay people can have civil partnerships and they can't, heterosexual couple. And she says it's because she doesn't want to be a wife. She doesn't want to be anybody's wife. She wants to be an equal partner. And the whole thing about husband and wife is that it's predicated on the male being the dominant partner in the relationship and all the rest of it, and she would be quite happy with a partner, but she doesn't want a husband. I mean, is that really what it boils down to, this?
I think you've got to remember that marriage in England and in the Isle of Man, in its present form, came about in the 18th century as a state control mechanism to protect the wealth of young heiresses from the stable lad and to stop them running. Yes, and effectively, up until then, marriage had been entirely the preserve of the church. But in the late 1750s in England and in the 1780s in the Isle of Man, Parliament, Tynwald, nationalised marriage, but then immediately gave it to the church to administer.
Yes.
And then for a long time, you couldn't get married other than in a Church of England church, even if you were Catholic or a dissenter or had no religious beliefs or were Jewish. And eventually they introduced things like register offices and authorised Quaker weddings, and then other nonconformists, then eventually Catholic weddings and Jewish weddings. But yes, you're right. And in other countries, it's interesting. For instance, in I think 20 countries and maybe 10 states of America, you can have civil partnerships or domestic partnerships, or pacts they're called in France, between heterosexual couples. In fact, in France, 95% of all civil partnerships are between heterosexual couples.
Right.
And yes, it's this concept of maybe not wanting a religious element at all, not wanting the historic baggage of marriage as conceived in English and Manx legislation as being the ownership by the man of the woman and all her goods,
Yeah.
wanting it to be equals. And in Holland, when they introduced heterosexual civil partnerships, I think now 15% of all heterosexual unions, so that's marriages and civil partnerships, are civil partnerships. And the interesting thing about France, and it's something to reflect on with what Mr. Singer said, was that in France, although 95% of civil partnerships are now between people of the opposite sex, heterosexual couples, the number of marriages has not gone down. So this is people looking for an alternative to marriage that then gives them a framework of rights in terms of inheritance of property, protection for maintenance for the children in particular, and also for things like survivorship rights for pensions and things like that, but without having to call yourself married.
Let's have a look at some of the comments that have come in. I totally agree with Mr. Singer. Equality should apply to all, heterosexual as well as homosexual. Can't disagree with that. I mean, all that any of us want out of life is a fair crack of the whip, isn't it?
It doesn't take anything away from anybody. It adds to the options available to people to live their lives.
And on a lighter note, this is from Dave C. He says, Stu, the farmer's concert nailed it last night. What's wrong with the Foxdale way? A natural marriage between a man and his sister. Tish.
I thought Foxdale was the man and his sheep.
Oh, that'll be a fat war out for you. You'll not be able to go to this. From somebody else. I'm absolutely in favour of gay marriage, but I'm struggling to see the relevance of civil partnerships at all for either homosexual or heterosexual couples. Once marriage equality exists, civil marriage already has no religious element whatsoever. Open to being convinced, but surely civil partnerships were a compromise at the time they were introduced and become an anachronism once the Equal Marriage Bill is passed.
I think there are two things there. First of all, marriage. The Isle of Man, the United Kingdom and Ireland are the only countries in Europe which have this concept of marriage being mainly a religious matter. When the Napoleonic reforms came in and swept across Europe, marriage became a state-registered and regulated thing. And if you wanted then to go off for a blessing later, the same day or a week, you did that. But then you come down to some people don't want to get married. They want to have a relationship which is recognised and regulated. And why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't we have different levels and forms as long as they're open to everyone equally?
Yeah, okay. So, I think the consensus opinion is that, whatever is fair for all is what we ought to do. So are you hopeful that this is going to go through, this amendment by Leonard Singer?
Well, you never know what the Legislative Council may do when it comes before it, but I think it's going to go through the keys next week, isn't it?
Yeah.
We know that anything to get through and be on the statute books has to get through Legislative Council and then be announced to Tynwald, or signed in Tynwald rather, before the dissolution. There's a general election due in September. There are bigger and more important issues than this for the general election, so it'd be good to get it out of the way, and let's hope they do that, I think.
Yeah, good stuff.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Who does the majority of household chores in your home? It's claimed women in Britain spend an average of 2 working days a month more than men on housework and childcare. A study by Oxfam has found, irrespective of income and employment status, more than 2/3 of women say that they still do the bulk of the household tasks. The charity says this unpaid work is holding women back all over the world. So, is the housework shared out in your household? Do the children maybe do any jobs in return for pocket money? Or do many chores still automatically fall at the feet of women? women these days? Does it matter really who carries out the household tasks? Brian called, when my wife was alive, I lost her 6 years ago now, I wouldn't let her do anything. I used to make sure it was all done and there was a meal waiting for her when she got home. I just loved and enjoyed doing it for her. It worked and it was nice. That sounds lovely, Brian. The only thing is that you're setting a very high bar for the rest of us ordinary men. And so you're not doing your gender any favours at all. What else have we got on this? I'm not trained in kickstarting a Hoover or have any qualifications in domestic engineering. Leave it to the expert Stu, says Cliffy. Okay. Hey boy, weren't women born to do our chores? Asks G, who is in for silent suppers, I would suspect. Stu, I tried helping, you can't win, says Jimmy. Well, you ought to know that you do it wrong, Jimmy. Stu, since when did rearing children become a worthless occupation? Of course, women and men should have equal rights, but we should honour one of the most important jobs there is, raising the next generation, says Jan. Yeah, I don't think anybody disputes that, Jan, but, do men take an equal part in it? Do they play a fair part in bringing up the children, for example? Hey, it used to be, when I was first married, I got married in 1977, and my wife was very much like my mum, who thought that it was the woman's place, was in the home, and to be a homemaker and all the rest of it, and that when I got home from work, just like when my dad got home from work, we would expect a meal on the table. Very old-fashioned way of doing things. And in a later relationship, I'd only been there for a week, and after I got divorced, and I said, I've run out of shirts, can you do some washing for me? The answer I got, I couldn't possibly repeat on air, but I was shown how to use the washing machine and the steam iron and things like that. So, even in that short period of time, things had changed and moved on. The answer is in the statement, women polled. If men were asked, the results would be very different, says Gary. Yes. Statistics again, you see. Hey boy, the amount of time that Professor Sally banged on about women's rights, she'd got the pots done or a few shirts ironed. Facts, says Frank. Okay. My ex-wife was a brilliant housekeeper, but she has so far collected 3. Text ran out. I've got no idea what that was going to be about. Hi, Stu, you don't have a dog and bark yourself, says David H. Oh, you see, I was waiting for somebody to send me the joke about, why do women marry white? So that they match the other domestic appliances. But, we didn't get that. But we've had fairly close. We've had a few that are fairly close. Anything else? The reason women are born with smaller feet than men is means they can stand closer to the sink. Oh, you're all in such trouble, all you guys, you see, and your women folk will know that it's you. It's no good claiming anonymity on this programme. You're all in really deep doo-doo, I'm afraid. Martin in Onken says, hi Stu, I've got a day off, so I'm cleaning the oven and I've got the washing on. Not because I have to, but because I want to. My missus works hard, as I do, so we just share. Some things I do better, some things she does better. Takes the pressure off both of us. Thank you, Martin. Well, that's a pragmatic way of doing things, isn't it? Equality in the relationship doesn't mean to say that everybody's got to do the washing up, but quid pro quo. So, maybe you're good at sorting out car problems or doing the gardening, for example. She looks after the house, whatever. I think as long as people are committed to a relationship, prepared to share the workload overall, then they tend to be the best relationship, I think. My husband works full-time and I'm a full-time housewife, so I do the majority of home kids' dog jobs, but he does happily help out. Are you sure he's happy about it? My friend's husband's retired early and does nothing, whereas my friend works 4 full days. My brother-in-law was a stay-at-home dad and brought up his daughter, but he didn't do housework or cook. His wife did it. That's from Sarah. Well, whatever works for people, I suppose, as long as nobody's taking the Michael. Hey boy, I remember my brother-in-law once bought my sister a set of those posh stainless steel pans. Guess what? They're still in a box under the stairs. How ungrateful is that? Asks Frank. Terribly ungrateful. Awful, yeah.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
That's it for the latest look back at Talking Heads. Our thanks as ever to everyone who took part in the programme. If you'd like to get involved in the discussion, you can call, text or email between midday and 2 p.m. on weekdays, or you can share your thoughts on the Facebook page at any time. That's Talking Heads with Stu Peters. You can listen back to each day's programme in full using the on-demand section of manxradio.com. And on the website you'll also find a daily update of what's up for discussion each day. You can also keep up to date with that information by liking the Facebook page or following Stu Manx on Twitter. And if there's anything you think we should be discussing on the programme, get in touch with us by emailing talk@manxradio.com. But that's it for now, so until next week, Goodbye.
Don't sit in the slow lane. Join the fast lane right now with Shaw's all-new Superfast Plus broadband. Enjoy more bandwidth, amazing speeds and the best value on the island from just £23.95 per month. So don't be left behind. Get a piece of the high-speed action with Superfast Plus broadband from Shaw. For details, visit our stores in Douglas, Ramsey and Port Erin or click shaw.com.
Love being Shaw.
Terms and conditions apply.